Chapter 1. The Corpse That Never Spoke. Operation Mincemeat. The Man Who Erased Himself. April 30th, 1943. Off the southern coast of Spain, a fisherman named José Antonio Rey Maria was about to make the strangest discovery of his life. The early morning fog rolled thick over the Huelva coastline. The sea was calm, almost too calm, and José's small wooden boat creaked with the rhythm of the tide. As he cast his nets, something pale caught his eye, something that didn't belong in the water. It floated just beneath the surface, bobbing gently like a lost boy. He rowed closer. What he saw made him stop dead. It was a man, a body, dressed in a British Royal Navy uniform, with a briefcase chained to his wrist. At first glance, it looked like another wartime tragedy, one of the thousands who had vanished beneath the waves. But what José didn't know was that this man wasn't a soldier, a sailor, or even alive when he entered the sea. He was a decoy, a ghost invented by British intelligence. And this body, floating off the coast of neutral Spain, was about to change the course of World War II. The war's great illusion. In 1943, Hitler's empire stretched across most of Europe. The Allies had clawed back North Africa and were eyeing their next move, an invasion of the European mainland. The problem was geography. The Mediterranean was a fortress. To invade Italy, the Allies would need to cross from North Africa to Sicily, an island so heavily fortified that Churchill called it the toughest nut to crack. Everyone knew Sicily was the logical next step. Even Hitler knew it. So the question was, how do you make the enemy look somewhere else? A dangerous idea. That's where British intelligence stepped in, specifically Section 17M of the Naval Intelligence Division, operating out of a secret base in London's Admiralty. The man in charge was Ewen Montagu, a barrister turned intelligence officer with a sharp mind and a flair for the dramatic. His partner, Charles Cholmondeley, was a lanky RAF officer with a moustache that curled like a question mark and a brain wired for mischief. Together, they had an outrageous idea. They called it Operation Mincemeat. The concept: plant fake invasion documents on a dead man's body, dump it off the coast of Spain and let it accidentally wash ashore, where German agents could find it. The hope was that the documents would convince the Nazis that the Allies planned to invade Greece or Sardinia instead of Sicily. It sounded absurd, even suicidal. But in the world of deception warfare, absurdity sometimes works best. Finding the perfect corpse. But there was one big problem. They needed a body, one that could plausibly pass for a drowned British officer. This was no easy task. They couldn't just use any corpse. It had to be someone who looked like they'd died in a plane crash or shipwreck. No bullet wounds, no obvious trauma. And they couldn't tell the man's real family what was going to happen. Montagu and Cholmondeley searched hospitals, morgues and city registries across Britain. Then, through a quiet arrangement, they found their man. His name was Glyndwr Michael, a homeless Welshman who had died in London after ingesting rat poison. No family, no money, no one to claim him. To history, Glyndwr Michael would be forgotten, but to the British, he was about to become Major William Martin, Royal Marines. The birth of a ghost. The transformation was meticulous. British forgers and intelligence officers spent weeks crafting an entire backstory for Major Martin. They created a wallet full of personal effects known as pocket litter to make him seem real, receipts from a London tailor, a note from his fiancée, Pam, a love letter stained with lipstick, a theatre ticket stub, keys, cigarettes and coins from recent pay. Each item was hand-selected to breathe life into a man who never lived. They even created a fake photo of Pam, played by a British secretary named Jean Leslie, whose photo was tucked lovingly into his wallet. To any investigator, Major Martin would look heartbreakingly human, an officer who drowned at sea on a secret mission.
Then came the most critical part, the documents. Inside the black leather attaché chained to his wrist, the British placed several letters between top Allied commanders. These top-secret memos outlined invasion plans for Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. The deception had to be flawless, detailed enough to convince Hitler's most skeptical officers. Even the language was carefully designed, casual, slightly careless, as if written between trusted colleagues. One letter mentioned, almost in passing, that poor Sicily would be just a fake target. That tiny line was worth thousands of Allied lives. Once everything was ready, the body was placed in a special canister filled with dry ice to preserve it. It was labelled, "House with care, optical instruments." The submarine HMS Seraph was chosen to deliver the body to the coast of Spain, where currents would carry it ashore near the town of Huelva, an area known for heavy German spy activity. On the night of April 29, 1943, under cover of darkness, the Seraph surfaced off the Spanish coast. The officers gathered on deck. They said a brief prayer, then slid the canister open. Inside lay the man who would soon fool Hitler himself. Wrapped in his uniform, Major William Martin was gently released into the sea. He drifted away with the tide, face turned towards the stars. The briefcase floated beside him. The next morning he was found by the fishermen. British intelligence waited. Days passed, then weeks. Through their secret channels, they learned that the Spanish had indeed discovered the body. The documents were retrieved and secretly passed to German agents operating in Spain. Everything was going according to plan. Now, all that mattered was whether the Germans would believe the lie. Back in London, Ewen Montagu could barely sleep. The success of the entire operation, and possibly the future of the Allied invasion, depended on whether one man's death could sell a perfect illusion. They had played God. They had created a man from nothing. Now, they waited to see if the ghost would speak. London, May 1943. In a small office hidden beneath the Admiralty building, two men stared at a teletype machine like gamblers watching a roulette wheel. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and anticipation. For Ewen Montagu and Charles Cholmondeley, every tick of that machine meant the difference between success and suicidal disaster. If the Germans believed their deception, the invasion of Sicily would go ahead uncontested. If they didn't, thousands of Allied soldiers would be walking into a slaughter. And somewhere across the Mediterranean, a dead man's story was now in play. The body that started a storm. Back in Huelva, Spain, the body of Major William Martin had caused immediate commotion. Spanish authorities recovered him from the water and noted the briefcase still attached to his wrist, a promising sign that whatever secrets he carried might be valuable. Spain was officially neutral in World War II, but in reality many high-ranking officials leaned toward the Nazis. British intelligence knew this and had deliberately chosen this coastline for that very reason. Within hours, the local Spanish commander contacted German Abwehr agents stationed in Madrid. The bait had been taken. From Madrid to Berlin, whispers began to move faster than bullets. German intelligence officers obtained copies of the documents, secretly opened and photographed before being returned to the Spanish, so as not to arouse British suspicion. The letters detailed Allied plans to invade Greece and Sardinia, with Sicily mentioned only as a diversion. On paper, it looked legitimate. The signatures were authentic, the letterheads were perfect. Even the ink matched the standard used by the British Navy. What no one in the Abwehr realised was that every word had been designed by Montagu and Cholmondeley to sound careless. Exactly the kind of language exchanged between trusted officers who assumed their words would never be seen by the enemy. Berlin takes the bait. When the documents reached Admiral Karl Dönitz, head of the German Navy, he was convinced. He reported the find directly to Adolf Hitler, who studied the material with intense interest. The Führer had been expecting an Allied invasion somewhere in southern Europe, but the question of where had kept his generals guessing for months. Now, thanks to Major Martin, it seemed the mystery was solved. The Allies were coming for Greece. Hitler issued immediate orders: reinforce the Balkans, divert panzer divisions from France to Greece, move air squadrons from Sicily to defend the eastern Mediterranean. To him, the evidence was irrefutable.
London holds its breath. Meanwhile, the real invasion plan, Operation Husky, the assault on Sicily, was moving forward quietly under Allied command. But Montagu's team still didn't know if the deception had truly taken root. The proof they needed would come from the most secret intelligence stream of the war, Ultra, the British code-breaking operation at Bletchley Park, where the Enigma cipher was being cracked daily. For weeks, the analysts intercepted German messages, scanning for any clue that the enemy's focus had shifted. And then, one morning, a decrypted message appeared on Montagu's desk. It read, "Measures in hand to reinforce Greece and Sardinia against enemy landing. Sicily considered diversionary." Montagu froze. They had done it. A corpse from a London morgue had just convinced Hitler to move entire armies. But there was still a problem. For the deception to be complete, the British needed to pretend to mourn their lost officer. They had to maintain the illusion that Major Martin was real, alive once, and now dead by accident. The newspapers were quietly instructed to publish a formal obituary. Major William Martin, Royal Marines, drowned at sea. Deeply mourned by his fiancée, Pam, the Royal Navy even included his name in official casualty lists. To the public, he was just one of the many young men lost in the Atlantic. But inside the Admiralty, his death was toasted in silence, because it might save tens of thousands of others. By late June, German intelligence had fully swallowed the bait. The Wehrmacht repositioned units to Greece and the Aegean Islands, leaving Sicily dangerously exposed. Hitler himself issued a personal directive, emphasizing that Greece was the decisive target. When Allied bombers began striking targets in Sicily in early July, the Germans interpreted it exactly as planned, a distraction. Then came the invasion. July 9th, 1943. Under a moonlit sky, British and American forces stormed the beaches of Sicily in one of the largest amphibious assaults of the war.
German reinforcements were hundreds of miles away, guarding the wrong coastline. By the time Hitler realized he'd been deceived, it was too late. The Allies had secured a foothold in southern Europe, setting the stage for the eventual invasion of Italy. When Montagu received confirmation of the invasion's success, he didn't celebrate. He simply looked at the photo of Pam on his desk and whispered, "Well done, Major Martin." The man who had never lived had changed history.
Huelva, Spain. The air was still, the sky clear. Beneath the rows of white crosses and sun-bleached stones, one grave stood apart, its inscription simple but heavy with mystery. William Martin, Major, Royal Marines, born 1907, died 1943. To the locals, it was just another Allied soldier buried far from home. To the men who knew the truth, it was a monument to one of the greatest acts of deception ever pulled off in human history. But even after the war ended, the world still didn't know who Major Martin really was. And that secret would remain buried for decades. The curtain of secrecy. In the chaotic months after victory, the British Admiralty quietly locked away the details of Operation Mincemeat. Even most of the men who had worked in naval intelligence were never told the full story. The documents, fake letters, and forged photographs, all boxed up, stamped top secret, and buried deep in the archives. Only a handful of people knew what had really happened in that strange spring of 1943, and for them, silence wasn't optional. It was duty. For years, the world believed the story told to the Spanish authorities, that Major William Martin had died when his plane crashed at sea. His fiancée, Pam, mourned him in print, though she was an intelligence officer's secretary who had never even met the man in the coffin. The entire life of Major Martin, his uniform, his love letters, his identity, existed only for the purpose of death. The secret that wouldn't stay buried. But secrets have a strange way of surfacing. In the 1950s, British author Duff Cooper, himself a wartime insider, published a novel called Operation Heartbreak. It told of a dead man used to deceive the enemy, a story uncannily similar to what had actually happened. It was fiction, but a little too close to fact. Then in 1956, Ewen Montagu, now retired from naval intelligence, decided to set the record straight, or at least as much as he was allowed to. He published a book titled The Man Who Never Was. It became an instant sensation. The world was captivated by the tale of a fake officer whose death fooled Hitler himself. Hollywood quickly followed, releasing the 1956 film adaptation starring Clifton Webb as Montagu, complete with dramatized submarine scenes and tense Spanish espionage sequences. But even then, one secret was kept hidden: the real name of the man in the grave, the search for the unknown man. Decades later, as archives began to open in the 1970s and 80s, historians and journalists started digging. Who was the body? Where had it come from? And what kind of life had it lived before being turned into a myth? In 1996, after years of research, British historian Roger Morgan uncovered evidence that pointed to one man, Glyndwr Michael, a homeless drifter from Wales. Michael had died in London in January 1943 after ingesting rat poison, possibly by accident, possibly by despair. To the world he had been invisible. But in death, he became one of history's most important ghosts. In 1998, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission added an inscription beneath the false name on his tombstone. Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, RM. For the first time, the man who had erased himself finally got his name back. Operation Mincemeat wasn't just a military trick. It was a psychological masterpiece, one that combined human understanding, theatre, and empathy in ways espionage had never attempted before. Montagu and Cholmondeley didn't just invent a lie. They built a life. They understood something few strategists did, that truth is often built from small, believable lies. They made Major Martin imperfect on purpose. His forged letters had smudges. His wallet had half-torn receipts. His fiancée's photo was slightly creased. Those little imperfections made the story real. And that, perhaps, was the true genius of Operation Mincemeat, not the body itself, but the soul they gave it. The success of the operation changed how intelligence agencies thought about warfare. From that point forward, deception became an official arm of strategy. No longer a desperate gamble, but a science. The lessons learned from Mincemeat directly influenced D-Day deception plans, including Operation Fortitude, which used fake radio chatter, double agents, and inflatable tanks to convince the Germans the Normandy invasion would land in Calais instead. It worked. And behind it all was the same principle that had fooled Hitler once before. Give the enemy what they expect to see, and let them lie to themselves. Yet, for all its brilliance, there was a quiet sadness to the operation. Montagu later admitted that he often thought about Glyndwr Michael, the real man beneath the uniform. He wondered who he had been before poverty and loneliness consumed him. What might have been different if someone had helped him while he was still alive? In his memoir, Montagu wrote, "He gave more to the Allied cause than most men who lived. It was both an honor and an apology. Because in the end, the war that took so many lives had also given one man meaning, though only after he was gone." Today, the story of Operation Mincemeat stands as a strange monument in the history of war. It wasn't a battle fought with bullets or bombs. It was fought with imagination, timing, and nerve. A single dead man, armed only with false letters and a made-up love story, outsmarted the most feared intelligence machine in Europe. It was proof that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't force. It's belief. And so, on that quiet grave in southern Spain, under the Mediterranean sun, lies not just a man, but a story. The story of the man who erased himself from life, so that others could live theirs.